Hey everyone, welcome to the Business Minded Sports Physio podcast. My name is Brian Schwabe, board certified sports physical therapist, entrepreneur, and co-founder of the Student Physical Therapist. I worked with elite athletes for over a decade and currently serve as the director of IO Sports Therapy, working side by side with high performance coaches, NFL and NBA skills trainers, and sports agents on a daily basis. I'm also an author, sports medicine consultant, course creator, speaker, and counselor sports therapist, traveling with professional athletes and celebrities. I created this podcast to share my experience as a sports physical therapist and entrepreneur so that I could give you everything you need to know to cash in on your passions, monetize your expertise, and create your own career Super Bowl. With that in mind, welcome to the podcast. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Business Minded Sports Physio podcast. In today's episode, we sit down with Jim Heafner. Jim is a cash-based physical therapist, orthopedic clinical specialist, author, educator, and the co-founder of the Student Physical Therapist. In today's episode, we're going to dive in with Jim about how he became successful as a cash-based PT and entrepreneur. Jim, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Brian, thanks for having me. I love catching up with you, and I hope we put on a good show for everybody tonight.
Absolutely. And I know that was a little formal for the conversations you and me typically have, but, I wanted to bring you on this podcast because you are very business-minded, and, a lot of our podcast listeners are interested in those entrepreneurial things. And I think you have a very interesting story. I think you have a very interesting entrepreneurial journey. And, I thought you were a perfect person to bring on this podcast. So I'd love to start by kind of just diving in and you telling us a little bit about yourself, and what got you into entrepreneurship in the first place.
Oh, gosh. Let's talk about what got me into, I would say, cash-based physical therapy initially. Because going through school, I always thought I wanted to have like 25 clinics. I don't know why 25 was the number that stuck in mind, but that seemed like successful at the time. And they were going to be insurance driven, and it was going to be a big operation that was going to be more like for my name or something like that. I don't know.
Sure.
But as I started talking to all my business mentors, going through residency, going through all the different clinical experiences, I quickly realized that none of them wanted to do the insurance route. And they said, if you can get by going the cash-based route, then I think you should. So I don't actually know where my initial sort of entrepreneurial drive stems from. I think it's just because I want to be creative and I want freedom over my time and my schedule, and freedom to do the things I want to do. And I think that fits the entrepreneur role perfectly.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think you've done that, right? You've had a cash-based practice for 7 years now? Is that how long?
Just about. It'll be 6.5 years.
6.5 years. So you were doing it before a lot of people were really starting to get popular with it. And, maybe for the listeners out there, can you tell us a little bit about how that started and then what your schedule is like now compared to then?
Yeah. Well, when it first gets started, I was someone, I think I'm naturally optimistic in the sense of I'm going to open my doors because I'm personable enough. People are just going to, I'll meet people and I'll start coming in pretty quickly. And I'll say it was fun to see how this journey progressed, because it was gradual and it took about 1.5 years really to build like a full schedule. And it took a lot of nights and evenings going to marketing meetings that I didn't want to do. I worked home health for the first year while I was doing it. So I had other income coming in, because, there's things, even as this optimistic person who is expecting it to just work right away. I mean, it takes a lot of effort. You have to build a community, you have to build trust. And then that's when those people, your community, starts referring their friends and family. And then everything starts rolling for itself.
Makes sense. I mean, so, you mentioned a little bit about how you've went out and you started marketing, started meeting people, but what was like the first step you took? You're like, I have to go meet people. Okay. So did you sit down? Did you map it out? What did you do specifically day one?
Well, my first step was, I want to meet people, but I don't want to have to leave my computer. So then I started emailing people, and emailing didn't work at all because everyone gets a lot of emails every day. What I had to do was actually get in front of some people. So I went to Chamber of Commerce meetings, and this is kind of all first at the same time. Chamber of Commerce, there's like 2 or 3 other BNI, like a business networking group, and they want you to become members of these things. But I wasn't sure if I was going to or not, but I started meeting people who then would come in for maybe an intro session, or they would at least remember me and remember sort of the conversation we had and my level of passion in what I'm doing. And then from there, they would start introducing me to their community. But it took, and I want everyone to hear this, it takes like, if you're trying to do an in-person business, it takes some in-person marketing.
Yeah.
And then I was going to, sorry for cutting you off there. But the other thing I would say is, as a cash owner, I started marketing myself to different gyms and fitness centers because I wasn't expecting to get a ton of referrals from doctors' offices. And I still don't, because all my referrals come from personal trainers. They come from my current community of patients. It's not coming from your traditional medical route.
And I think that's the benefit of what you're doing now, right? You have referrals from numerous sources, but you had to build it up, like you said, being in person. So in person was the best way that you found to grow a business in cash-based PT.
Absolutely. Yes. And
okay, so no ads, nothing else.
Oh, I loosely tried that stuff. But like when you're first starting out, one, like Facebook, Google, they're all changing their algorithm constantly. So you need to you can do that and it might work, but you need to have capital and you need to invest in that strategy. So the one that was maybe cheaper and what I thought was more authentic, even though I didn't want to do it necessarily right away, because it's intimidating. You have to go and promote yourself. You have to have a clear identity, like an identification of who you are and what you can do for people. So like I had to build those with each step along the way. Because in that first one, it's like, hey, I'm a physical therapist. Well, yeah, but so is so-and-so who goes through insurance. Like, what makes me different? Like, why come pay cash to see me? And that's where I didn't think an online advertisement could do it. And, potentially now as I'll grow into the next steps of the business still, then I might use more online stuff. But now I have a website that's more robust. I have 70 plus 5-star Google reviews to verify. So like that presence is more built up where I just feel a lot more confident that if they could go and see more online and be confident with what they're going to get with my business. So, absolutely. And what I'll say, and I know I keep talking on this part of it now, and maybe 2 years ago, I started getting organic Google referrals. People would, on their intake form, would say, I keyword searched this in your area and your reviews came up. It wasn't like day one, people were like, Heafner Health, like no reviews. Let's see how this goes.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. So, but that's the transition of business, right? You've grown over time, and now because you've grown it organically, you're getting referrals on Google because people are actually putting social proof into those Google reviews, which is more authentic, anyways. All right, we all look up stuff.
Yes.
Any restaurant you go to, you're looking up reviews, whether it's Yelp or Google, right? And I think Google is probably even more powerful because they own everything, right? They own the entire, basically, internet.
Yes.
So you have to have those Google reviews for sure. And I think that gives a lot of social proof that you don't necessarily get with ads and things like that.
Yeah, and I know you can funnel it and get it that way, but for me, especially because unless you're well established in your community, I would say the best way is to get out and meet those people who are also in the community, because those people know people.
No, that's a good point. It's a really good point. So tell me a little bit about now what your schedule is like now compared to what it was before. Are you working longer? Are you working shorter hours? What does that look like? And how many patients would you see in a typical week?
Well, I would say if now, because life changes. I have 3 little kids at home now too. My journey kind of looks like a bell, somewhat of a half bell curve where I peaked about 4 years in of seeing the most amount of people. And then COVID hit also kind of somewhere around there. And then now, because life is busier, I was able to shorten my hours just slightly. And so I'm seeing maybe 3 or 4 people less per week than I was at my very peak. But those 3 or 4 people less allow me to get home, allow me to take my daughter to and from school. And it gives me more flexibility. So it's like I could book more people most likely, but there's a trade-off for everything.
Absolutely. And I think now too, you have all these other endeavors that you've done, right? You're an author, you have the student physical therapist, you have some other online products. So how does that all mix in there with this cash-based practice? How do you balance that act of having 2 different types of businesses, but all cash?
Well, I look at the bottom line for each one of those, and then I decide which lever I want to pull the most, and which ones I want to put effort towards. And then I also compare that short term to what I want it to look like in 5 and 10 years, and then that's kind of how I decide, where and what I want to do more of. So I'm very much interested in the clinical work, and I love sort of the 9 to 5 time period. But I also do want to see my more passive streams of income continue to grow. And like I think as you're alluding to, it's hard to find the time for both of those things. And that's why I'm slowly starting to build into my schedule more time for those passive endeavors. And that looks like blocking 1 or 2 lunches a week, or blocking half of a morning on a Friday, and then committing to those other things.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you have to, right? You have to schedule it in. Otherwise you won't do it when you're busy and when you're running your entire practice, right? So you have a practice.
That exactly is my biggest problem, because someone will call and they'll say, "Hey, do you have any times open?" And I'll say, "Yeah, I can see you during this lunchtime," or whatever, where I was going to do something else. And now I'm finally starting to take that stand of, hey, for me to feel fulfilled with this and hit both passions that I'm interested in, I need to actually start blocking that time for myself. And I love having that. I like having that problem. Like it was scarier when I was trying to figure out how to get people in the door. So like I'm okay with that, but it still is something I'm working through.
And how do you make that decision? Like when do you say, okay, I'm busy enough where I can do that? Is there a metric you use for that, or is that just an intuitive feel after being in practice for, like I said, almost 7 years?
Well, my wife is in finance, and she helped me put together a monthly, quarterly sort of budget P&L, like how much money do I want to make, and then sort of where am I at in relation to that. And so once I started hitting that number consistently, then I was able to pull some of those other triggers. So, and I'm very aware of how much money we spend as a family, how much money I spend as a business, and then do I have wiggle room to start incorporating that in? And I'm ready.
So in other words, know your numbers.
Know your numbers, and I don't live and die by my numbers, but it makes it a lot easier to start hitting your goals when you have something to look for.
Makes perfect sense. So tell me a little bit more about some of these other goals that you have now that you're starting to understand where your numbers are. You're starting to hit those things. You're able to say no a little bit. What are some things that you're trying to push for as you continue to grow your business and your career?
One thing that I want to get into, which is similar to how you're doing it right now, is getting into podcasting, or almost like online education-based resources to initially help other physical therapists, other healthcare practitioners. And I want to do that mainly from a standpoint of how to give better clinical education, but really from a standpoint of understanding how to mesh both the biomechanics of movement and the efficiency of the human body with kind of this major insurge of pain science education that's come out. Because I think we were very biomechanical for a while, and then we learned a ton of great information about pain science. And now I think both as a profession and as a community helping those people, we're a little bit confused on how to integrate that information. And at least that's how I feel. And that's how it felt for a while educating my patients. And now I've found this sweet spot of what that world looks like sort of in between those two. And that's what I want to talk to people about. And I've been working really hard on the side to make that happen. So, I mean, hopefully that'll be the next steps moving forward.
Absolutely. And I think, that's part of, I can speak for probably both of us here, of part of the reason why we also revamped the student physical therapist, to really try to just take a look and step back and say, what do we actually want to provide to other PTs as well? Right. And that's where part of the reason why we started that. But tell me what your favorite part about the student physical therapist is, because you mentioned education is something you're passionate about. That's one endeavor that you are participating in with education, and among others. But what's your favorite part about the student physical therapist and what it brings to education?
We've been at this for a long time now. So it has shifted over time, because initially I loved writing the blog post articles and in synthesizing research and information and putting together these long form articles. And then somewhere in the middle, I loved all of our special test pages that are on there. So if you go on the website, one of the main tabs is special tests. You can look and see the whole list of them, like 100 plus of them. And those have been a great resource for people. And then what I am most passionate about now is the insider access information, which is a subscription-based page. But you and I and Chris Fox, who was the third member who used to be on the Student Physical Therapist, all three of us have put our favorite information from examination, treatment, basically all of our clinical reasoning under that platform.
Yeah. No, and I think that's my favorite part of it is how it's grown from, okay, we used to love doing blog posts. We did the special test pages. We all went through our transitional periods of learning, right, and trying to become established experts in whatever we were passionate about, and then learning how to take that information and, break it down. Because I think one thing that you and me both agree on is that continuing education is not up to par, of what gets approved. And I think that, being able to say, you know what, we might not be able to get approval for this stuff, but we know that this stuff works. And we know that giving this information is really important. And we learned it ourselves. So we want to be able to pass that on as much as possible because we feel really blessed that we had those experiences and that knowledge.
And like, I know people do want CEUs some people want that, but also like the insider access is like our day in and day out, like what we actually do in the clinic. Not a lot of continuing education seems like, well, you need to cover these bases, so we need to talk on these bases. And I think ours is like, this is what we do. Like, this is what we do. Yeah. This is why we do it. This is what the research says in relation to that. And that's why I would check it out.
Yeah. And I think that's part of the reason why, I don't go to as many conferences as I used to, because a lot of the CEUs are all the same now. And I don't get much out of them anymore, unfortunately, right? Because I can't actually put them into practice, or I can't actually like learn that little trick that, I want to learn to actually change the way I'm practicing or change the way I'm doing something business-wise as well. Like any of the above, right? Whether it's clinical reasoning, whether it's business, any of those return to sport testing type thought processes. Like I don't get it from the conferences as much, right? Or if I do look up a CEU, they have, like you said, just like quizzes of stuff that we have to get through just to get the CEU, but it's not really helping me.
And I think I remember going to one of my first CSMs after my residency year, and someone was telling me, yeah, they put all of this information in so everyone can kind of get up to speed on things. Like that's what you get at conferences. And, fortunately, and because of how I'm passionate about physical therapy, I'm usually reading the most up-to-date stuff well before that gets to a conference. So I think that's why it doesn't seem as exciting when we go. And I'm not trying to deter people at all from going, because I think it's a great way to meet community and to stay engaged. But just to your point, one, because of busyness with business and family, but two, like I just don't get the same value that I used to.
Yeah. No, I think education is going to start changing hopefully soon with the way that they just approve CEUs in general, but also just, getting quality. Like I follow the same 4 or 5 people and I get my information from those people because they've done it. They've actually experienced it. They do it on a day in and day out basis versus some other people that I don't think do it on a daily basis. And then they try to teach it. I don't really get a lot of value from that because I don't feel like there's substance there. I think that hopefully over time, we're going to start seeing more clinical experts, true experts that are trying to present on a topic, doing what they actually do on a daily basis. And, I know that when you give education out, you've done it, right? You've experienced it. You did your residency, you became orthopedic clinical specialist. You actually see the population you're trying to influence, and also you're teaching those things as well, but you've done it.
Completely. And I mean, it's been such a fun journey over the past 10 years, and it's been a ton of work. And that's, something else I wanted to hit home on tonight with the aspect of being an entrepreneur is that even still, there's a lot of evenings that I'll stay up and do what I like to do, which is learn more, engage with. It's no longer like the writing notes in the evening problem. It's researching what I want the future to be. A lot of sort of like deep thought on where I think things need to go. But, it's not, if you're trying to go this route because you think it's going to be easy, that's not the way to go. You go this route because you care on a different level. You have personal reasons that you want to do it, but it's going to be work. So like you have to enjoy the work.
Yeah, absolutely.
And like work play relationship is so funny to me because it's not work. Like for me, it's not work. I don't mind doing this stuff. So like, we're going to air quotes work because I'm doing stuff that's pertaining to Heafner Health and the student physical therapist quite a bit.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, and that's the truth. If you're really passionate about what you're doing, even if you're an entrepreneur working crazy amounts of time, it's because you enjoy it. Right. That's a choice, right? That's a sacrifice that you want to make a lot of times. And I think that that holds true for a lot of business owners and a lot of just entrepreneurs in general. You have to really be able to dive deep and want to do those things because there's nights that you don't want to do it and other nights that you really want to do it, but you always enjoy it still. You're right. The work-life balance for that, it looks different, but if you're enjoying it, then it makes it so much better.
Like the perception of that and like even how that feels in your body when you do it chronically is much different. The person who's grinding out in something they don't like to do, that's stress on the body and the brain versus I almost get more invigorated from it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I do want to go into just a little direction change. You mentioned, sure, being an entrepreneur and working at night and all these things, and you've done all these different endeavors. What is one thing that hasn't gone the way you expected it to go, though, as you've been, working through each one of those endeavors?
I don't know where to place the blame on certain things because there's many books that I started and didn't finish. There's other books that I've completed but haven't gone very far. And it might be me taking the next step of marketing more, or hiring somebody to do that sort of marketing. But like things that haven't gone right is mainly because of where I've pivoted my point of interest. But I still don't view those as failures necessarily because of the amount of information I learned, shortcuts that I learned sort of in the process of things. So, I'm trying to think of something else that like was because you're asking that was a failure more or less, but that also, so it didn't go the way I wanted it to go.
Yeah. I'm trying but you already alluded to it. You literally just said the failure also helped you learn something along the way because you took that challenge on, right? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, you make a good point there though, too, right? I ask this to people because as we're going through entrepreneurial type things, nothing goes according to plan, but there's also things that you thought were going to go perfect or thought were going to go one way and they go a complete different way, but maybe that taught you something as well. I know it has for me, even when mm-hmm. I wasn't even thinking about going into private practice where I'm working, as a director of a out-of-network cash-based practice, and I was going after pro sports. Well, I kept failing at those interviews, but what I learned with that is, each interview that I went on, I found another thing I didn't know before talking with those people when I was just mm-hmm. even interviewing. And that helped me when I got to this job because now I could take those experiences and be like, oh, you know what, that person said this, and this is what it's all about in the team environment. And I can actually apply some of those things. Or, this business thing that I tried out with this program, well, I didn't market it quite the right way. I was a little bit too niche on it and it didn't work out. Does that make sense? So like there's certain things that you can learn along the way when you're failing as well. But that's what I was really trying to allude to.
Yeah, because what I haven't failed on is the direction that I want to go. And I think maybe that's like because I'm making sure that pushes forward by when I have those small failures in different areas. That doesn't mean like my whole North Star direction has changed. It just means like, okay, this thing didn't work out. Like, I mean, that happens to everybody. Like that happens in sports and life and business. So it's like I don't overcommit emotionally to things that, well, I mean, nothing is really in our full control, but like I know what direction I want to go, and then when those failures happen on the periphery, that's okay. That's okay because I know I'm going to get back up and find another avenue.
That's being an entrepreneur.
Yeah. And oh God, it's very crappy in the moment of it sometimes. But I mean, like 6 months later, you go, wow, like that was, that was close. And now I'm doing something that I'm even more passionate about, that I was almost happy that that thing happened the way it did.
Makes sense. All right, Jim, I'm going to ask you one more question. Okay. What do you think you're going to be doing in 10 years? What does your career look like in 10 years? Give me like the step-by-step of exactly what it looks like.
I see myself being part owner of like a wellness type of center that has other practitioners involved in it. So right now, Heafner Health is just me. I'm all parts of it, but I would love to have a few other healthcare practitioners in the room. I want to be educating people in person, so groups of people, and that includes groups of both healthcare professionals, but then also the public. I want to be educating them on how to move, how to feel better in their bodies, how to understand the interaction of the body and the mind. Because that's what I talk about all day long. Is I talk about how pain and injury occurs, and then how that relates to their habits, their psychology, their life philosophy, and I'm really honing in on that message, and I'm seeing the changes in the clinic, which is what excites me the most. So, in addition to, and lastly, with Heafner Health, I want to have that wellness type center, and then I also want to have a few PTs, 1 to 3 physical therapists working along with me, in addition to probably a massage therapist, some sort of, I'm going to say chiropractor, even though that might be frowned upon. Like, because there's good and bad in all fields. I have a close relationship with 2 or 3 chiropractors around Boulder. And I want to partner with those people because we have the same core values on what it takes to get someone better.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Thanks.
I love the vision. Love the
Thank
vision.
You. And that doesn't even include the stuff that we do together. Like, I was thinking of
oh yeah.
And then actually it's built in because that's the in-person education part of it. Like all of that information will be on the Insider Access too. So
absolutely.
that's the online to in-person sort of transition.
Yeah, no, listen, I think that's great. You got exactly what you want to do in 10 years for the cash-based practice, the educational part, and more. Mm-hmm. And having that vision is so important. But Jim, I think that's awesome, man. I think that, the stuff that you mentioned about how you built your business, the things that you've done, the failures, but things that you've learned, their philosophies on the work-life balance as well. Those are all really valuable things for everybody listening to this podcast right now. So thanks again for coming on the podcast and having another conversation with me. We made it a little bit more formal than normal, but that's because I think you have some really good insights into things you've done. And I don't think a lot of people understand what it takes, but they can have a better understanding now of what it takes to do all the things you've done if they have similar visions and similar goals. So,
well, thank you for having me. And then whenever, I would love to be back on the show too.
Yeah, no, we have a lot more to dive into, and we'll definitely have you back on. So that's a wrap for this episode of the Business Minded Sports Physio podcast. If you guys like this, please subscribe to it on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or our TSPT YouTube page. We put these on as well if you want to see our faces. So stay tuned for more episodes coming up shortly.